The Crow Nation took a man born into slavery, made him a warrior, made him a brother, and made him their highest war chief. I repaid them by guiding the United States Army to their allies' village, where soldiers slaughtered at least 163 men, women, and children at dawn. 2 years later, the Crow invited me back. They fed me. They honored me. And then, according to the men who were there, I started bleeding and could not stop. The betrayal is real, and so is what came after it. My name is James Beckwourth, born 1798, Frederick County, Virginia. I spent 42 years as a free trapper, Crow warrior, war chief, Army scout, and mountain man. Every one of those years earned in country that killed careful men and destroyed careless ones before the first winter was out. Crow territory, Wyoming and Montana, the Rocky Mountains, the Sierra Nevada. The nearest settlement from Deep Crow land was 30 days of hard riding in good weather. In bad weather, it was a different calculation entirely, and bad weather was most of the year. The year I first walked into the wilderness, a letter from where I was standing took 3 months to reach the East Coast. Nobody was coming if something went wrong. There was no mechanism for coming. You were out there and you handled it or you did not. This is the story of what I built in that country, and what I destroyed, and what the destruction cost me in the end, in a Crow lodge in Montana, in the fall of 1866, over a cup I should have thought harder about before I drank. But before I get to the lodge and the cup, I need to tell you where I started, because you cannot understand what the betrayal meant without understanding what they gave me first. The morning my father walked into a St. Louis courtroom and signed the Emancipation Papers, I was 26 years old. I had been alive in a country that considered me property for every one of those years. My father was James Beckwourth, a white Virginia planter. My mother was a black woman he owned. He had 13 children with her. He moved us to Missouri when I was about 11, sent me to school in St. Louis for 2 years, taught me to read, taught me to write, then apprenticed me to a blacksmith named Kasner, and that was supposed to be the shape of my life. The forge, the bellows, the hammer, the small permitted world of what a black man was allowed to be in Missouri in 1820. I had a falling out with the smithy. I will not go into the specifics, except to say that at the end of it, I was standing in the street outside that shop with nothing but the clothes I was wearing and a very clear understanding of what that country thought I was worth. The ceiling was fixed. It was low. And no amount of capability, no amount of literacy, no amount of hard work was going to raise it 1 inch. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Not the romance of what came next, the actual arithmetic of that morning. You are young, you are strong, you can read and write, which puts you ahead of half the white men on the street. None of it matters. The shape of your life has been decided by something that has nothing to do with what you can do. And out there, past the Missouri River, past everything mapped and settled and decided, the Rocky Mountains, men coming back from them with stories that did not sound like anything else. Stories about a country where the only question was whether you could survive it, where the beaver did not know what color your skin was and the cold did not care who your father was, and the only currency that mattered was whether a man could be counted on when the situation turned bad. That is not a romantic idea. That is a calculation. I made it on a cold morning in St. Louis in 1824, and I have never second-guessed it. My father signed the papers. I walked out of that courtroom a free man for the first time in my life. I joined General Ashley's Rocky Mountain Fur Company, 29 men heading west into country most of them had never seen. And I did not look back. There was nothing behind me worth turning around for. What I did not know yet was that the country I was walking into would give me something I had never had and could never have had in the United States. I did not know it would also give me a choice I would spend the rest of my life trying to live with. That choice is still coming. I have not forgotten what I told you at the start. What I knew how to do when I left St. Louis was work iron. That was the full inventory of my useful skills. The Rocky Mountains had no use for that. What the Rockies required was a completely different set of knowledge, and the curriculum was straightforward. You learned it fast, or you froze. There was no middle option. The first winter nearly killed me twice. Ashley's company crossed the Continental Divide through snowdrifts that came to a horse's chest. Men in the party stopped talking to each other because talking wasted heat you could not afford to waste. You learned very quickly to move through cold the way you move through deep water, slowly, with complete intention, spending nothing you did not absolutely have to spend. I want you to understand something about that kind of cold. Not uncomfortable cold. Not cold that makes you pull your coat tighter. 50 below cold. The kind that gets inside the actual structure of your body and starts changing things. Your hands stop being your hands. They become objects attached to your wrists that you have to look at and instruct, the way you would instruct a tool. Your thoughts slow down. Not the feeling of thoughts slowing, the actual slowing. You will begin a sentence in your head and lose the end of it before you get there. You stop being a person with a plan and you become a problem that needs solving. That is where I was that first winter. A problem. Trying to solve myself one step at a time through snowdrifts that had no end. We ran out of food on the third week. There is a specific kind of hunger that comes after the first few days of nothing. It stops being pain and becomes a sound. A low constant sound in your body that does not stop and does not get louder, just sits there underneath everything else, and you learn to work around it the way you work around an old injury. You stop expecting it to leave and you start negotiating with it. I shot a wolf on day 4 of nothing, and we ate every part of it we could get a knife into. Hide, organs, the lot. I remember the taste exactly. I remember thinking that I had eaten worse in Missouri, and then I remember thinking that was probably not true, but I needed it to be true at that moment, so I let it stand. A man tells himself what he needs to tell himself to keep moving. That is not weakness. That is how it works out there. 2 men in the party turned back that third week, just turned their horses around without saying much and went south. Nobody argued with them. Nobody said a word about it. Out there you did not judge a man for knowing his limit. You judged him for not knowing it because not knowing it got other men killed. I watched them go and felt something I did not have a name for yet, the specific feeling of choosing to stay in a situation that reasonable men were leaving. I would feel that feeling many more times before I was done. I arrived at a trading post near the end of that first season in a condition that made a man who saw me use the word corpse. That is a direct quote. He looked at me and said that word, and he was not wrong. I had lost 30 pounds I could not afford to lose. My hands had frostbite damage on 4 fingers that took months to heal correctly and left 2 of them permanently stiff in cold weather from that point forward. I lay in a bunk in that post for 3 days and made myself a promise. If I survived this, I would go back to civilized life. I said it with complete conviction. I meant every word. I did not go back. What stopped me was simple. I lay there and I thought about what going back actually meant. The forge, Missouri. The country with the fixed ceiling and the narrow box. I weighed that against what I was lying in, half frozen, damaged, in a trading post at the edge of the known world. And even that, even the half-frozen, damaged version of the frontier, had one thing the other did not. No ceiling. In the summer of 1825, I attended the first Rocky Mountain Rendezvous on Henry's Fork of the Green River. 600 men gathered on a river flat to trade and drink and settle accounts and tell stories that got larger every time they were told. Trappers, company agents, native warriors, and the kind of men who did not fit anywhere else on the continent. Nobody at that rendezvous cared what you had been. The only currency was what you could do and whether a man could count on you when the situation turned serious. I had never been in a place like that. I did not know a place like that was possible. I was 27 years old, and I had found the only country on earth where I was just a man. That was the easy part. What happened the following year is where this story actually begins. In the summer of 1826, I was moving through Crow territory alone, trapping a stream that ran cold and fast out of the mountains to the east, when I rode into a situation I could not ride out of. I heard them before I saw them. Hooves on dry ground, moving fast, from 3 directions at once. A Crow war party, 12 men, maybe 15, mounted and positioned so that every direction I could run was already covered. I had a history by then of talking my way through bad situations and riding hard out of worse ones. I had been in enough tight spots in 18 months on the frontier to know the difference between a situation that could be managed and one that could not. This one could not. The riding option was gone. The talking option required a language I did not have. I sat on my horse with my rifle across my lap and my hands visible, and I waited to see what they would do. They did not kill me. They took me. A trapper named Caleb Greenwood had told a story at the previous rendezvous. Told it around a campfire the way a man tells a story he has told before and enjoys telling, with the particular ease of someone who has decided whether it is true is beside the point. The story was this. James Beckwourth was the stolen son of a Crow chief. taken as a baby by Cheyenne raiders, sold to white men, the dark skin, the build, the way he moved, all of it fit, if a man was looking for it to fit. I do not know whether Greenwood believed it. I do not know whether the Rocky Mountain Fur Company planted that story deliberately to establish a man inside the Crow trade network. Both explanations are possible, and I have thought about both of them many times over the years. What I know is what happened when the war party brought me to their village and put me in front of their chief, a man named Big Bull. Big Bull was a big man, older, with the specific stillness of someone who has been in authority long enough that he no longer needs to announce it. He looked at me for a long time without speaking, the kind of silence that has weight in it. Then he said something to the men around him, and one of them translated it into rough English. He said I was his son, his long-lost son, stolen by Cheyenne raiders many years before, returned. There was a sound in the village when he said that. Women, several of them, moving forward. One of them, older, her hair loose, put her hands on my face and looked at me for a long time and then said something I did not understand. I stood there in that village, and I made a decision, not the decision you might expect. I did not decide to lie exactly. I decided to see what happened if I stayed. Those are different things, and the difference between them mattered to me then, and still matters to me now. I stayed for 12 years. I want you to understand what that decision meant in 1826. In the United States of America, a black man had a set of choices that fit inside a very small box: enslaved, technically free in a state that treated free and property as nearly the same condition; invisible or dangerous, and dangerous had immediate consequences. That was the box, the full size of it. In that Crow village, with Big Bull's hand on my shoulder and his people around me, I stepped out of that box so far it ceased to exist. I was not a black man to the Crow. I was not a white man either. I was a warrior. And then, over 12 years of earning it one fight and one hard season at a time, I became something more than that. The first thing I learned was the language, not trading words, not enough to get through a transaction. The full thing, the grammar of it, the ceremony of it, the difference between how a warrior addressed his chief and how he spoke to a man he was about to fight. Greenwood helped me in the early months when he came through. After that, I was on my own, working it out from context and repetition, and the specific embarrassment of saying something completely wrong in front of people who had sharp senses of humor about that kind of mistake. The Crow respected a man who did the full work. Language was the first proof I was serious about staying. The second proof was the fighting, and the fighting is where things changed quickly. The Crow were at war on a regular basis, with the Blackfoot to the north, with the Cheyenne and Sioux to the east. Territorial war, horse raid war, the accumulated grievances of generations pressed into specific violent action. A man who wanted to rise among the Crow had to fight, and fighting on the plains was not what I had imagined when I heard the word fight in Missouri. It was fast. It was decided in seconds and sometimes in less than seconds. You carried a rifle, a bowie knife, and a tomahawk, and before very long you understood exactly which one you were going to reach for depending on the distance between you and the other man, and the terrain you were standing on, and how many were coming. By the end of year 2, I had been in enough engagements that the Crow had a name for what I did in close fighting: bloody arm. A man does not choose those names. They come from what the men standing next to you saw, and they stick harder than anything you could choose for yourself. I learned to ride the way Crow warriors rode, low and fast, one hand free for the bow or the gun, using the horse as cover in the specific way that plains warriors use their horses, which is nothing like how a white man rides. I learned to read a landscape for angles and cover, and the places a mounted man could go, versus the places the ground would stop him. A trapper reads country for water and game and shelter. A Crow warrior reads the same ground for approach and escape, and the blind spots where a man can move without being seen. Those are two completely different ways of understanding the same piece of earth, and learning the second one properly takes years of making expensive mistakes. Year 3, I took a wife, Crow custom. I'm not going to pretend my domestic life during those years was simple or tidy. I had more than one wife over the 12 years, which was Crow practice and not some personal distinction. I fathered children in that time. Their names do not appear clearly in any record I know of, and that has sat wrong with me for a long time. They were real people. They deserved better than the silence history handed them. What I can tell you is the daily shape of those years and what they felt like from the inside. Dawn came early in the crow camp and cold, even in summer. The smell of a crow camp in the morning is something I can still produce in my mind without effort. Wood smoke, horses, the specific smell of hides drying on the frames outside the lodges, the damp grass smell of the plains themselves coming in from every direction. I rode out with the warriors for the hunt or the patrol, depending on the season. I ate what they ate. I slept where they slept. I participated in the sun dance, not as an observer, as a participant. I went on vision quests alone into the hills with nothing but water, and came back changed in ways I still cannot fully explain to someone who has not done it. I lived inside the crow's understanding of the world. That understanding is not the white man's understanding in any small way. The crow did not separate the human world from the natural world. The land was not property. Time did not move in a line. A man's worth was not measured in what he owned, but in what he had done and what others said he had done. Those ideas, sitting inside them for 12 years, changed how I thought in ways that did not reverse when I left. In those years, I also changed what the crow got from the white traders, and this matters. Before I was there, a crow warrior might trade a fully tanned buffalo hide, days of skilled work, for a pint of trade whiskey. I knew the value of that hide. I had spent enough time among white traders to know exactly what they were doing and what the margins were and where the dishonesty lived in the transaction. I became the crow's agent with the fur companies. When a company opened a post near the Blackfoot, I got that same company to appoint me their man among the crow, so my people would be treated fairly. No more pint of whiskey trades, no more watching men who knew better take advantage of men who trusted them. My people. That is what I called them by year 5. That is what they were. After enough seasons and enough proof, enough battles, enough councils, enough years of demonstrating that my judgment was worth following, the Crow gave me the title. Highest-ranking war chief of the Crow Nation, leader of the Dog Clan, the man who sat in council and made decisions that affected thousands of lives. I remember the day Big Bull told me. We were sitting outside his lodge in the early evening, the light going flat and gold across the grass, the horses moving slowly at the edge of the camp. He did not make a ceremony of it. He said it plainly, the way he said most important things, and then he sat quietly and let it be what it was. I did not say anything for a while either. There was nothing to say that would have been adequate. I sat there with the planes running out in every direction and thought about the courtroom in St. Louis and the forge, and the morning I had stood in the street outside Kasner's shop with nothing. I thought about the specific distance between that morning and this one. I could not calculate it, not in miles and not in years and not in any unit I had available. Think about that arithmetic carefully. The country that considered me property in 1798 had no rank available to me, no office I could hold, no ceiling high enough to matter. 60 miles past its western boundary I became a king. Same body, same man, same James Beckwourth, who had stood outside a blacksmith shop in St. Louis and been told that was the shape of his life. Some of you watching this right now are sitting in a house that got quiet in a way you did not expect. The work ended, or the kids left, or something you built for a long time stopped needing you the way it used to. And you are watching a video about a man who walked away from everything and built something else entirely somewhere no one could follow him. I noticed that. I think you notice it too. I'm not going to explain what that means. I just want you to know the feeling I am describing is one I understand from the inside. I have not forgotten the cup. I am getting there now. I left the Crow in 1837, not because I wanted to, because the world underneath me was changing and I could feel the ground moving. The fur trade was dying. The great rendezvous on the river flats, those weeks of hundreds of men trading and settling accounts, were ending. The market for beaver pelts had collapsed because silk had replaced beaver felt in European hats. That one fashion decision made by men in London and Paris, who had never set foot west of Philadelphia, ended the mountain man era of the American West while I was still standing in it. The thing I had given 20 years to was becoming history underneath my feet. I drifted for years. The Seminole War in Florida, which was its own kind of ugly and does not belong in this particular story. California during the gold rush, which I will say this much about. A lot of men went to California expecting the land to hand them something and left with nothing because they had not understood that the land does not hand anything to anyone. In 1851, I found a pass through the Sierra Nevada that still carries my name. Beckwourth Pass at 5,121 feet, the lowest crossing of those mountains, which I discovered on a morning in April when the snow was still deep on every other route, and the pass sat there open and obvious once you knew where to look. I guided the first wagon train of emigrants through it that same year, families, children, women who had been on the trail for months, and were thin and tired and did not fully understand yet how close they had come to not making it if they had tried the other routes. I rode at the front of that column through my pass and felt the specific pride of a man who has found something that was always there, waiting to be found, and made it useful to people who needed it badly. I was 53 years old. I had been in this country for 30 years. I had found something that would outlast me and serve people I would never meet, and I thought that was worth something. I was foolish enough, in my own words from the autobiography, to promise myself a substantial recognition of those labors. Neither the recognition nor the money came. The emigrants moved through the pass and moved on, and James Beckwourth was someone they might mention once in a letter home and then forget. I dictated my life story in the winter of 1854 to a judge named Bonner who was staying at my hotel in the Sierra Valley. He took it down over several months, working evenings while the snow came down outside. He was a good enough listener, and I was not short of material. I talked and he wrote, and by spring we had a book. He took it east to Harper & Brothers in New York, and they published it in 1856. My name was on the cover. The contract said I was entitled to half the proceeds. I never saw $1 of it, not 1 cent. Bonner took the money and kept it, and when I sought remedy through legal means, I was reminded, in the particular way that legal systems remind black men of things, that the outcome of such proceedings was not likely to favor me. And the men who read the book called me a liar. The gaudy liar. That was the specific nickname. Because the things I had described, rising to war chief of the Crow, the battles, the raids, the discovery of the pass, the life I had actually lived and built over 40 years, those things were too large for men who had already decided what a black man from Virginia was capable of. Easier to call it fiction, more comfortable to dismiss it than to reckon with what it meant. It took 100 years, and a new generation of scholars going back through the actual historical records, the Crow accounts, the fur company ledgers, the military records, the diaries of men who had been there, to confirm that what I had described had happened, that the battles were documented, that the chieftaincy was real, that the pass existed and bore my name for a reason. I knew all of that without their confirmation. I had been there. But I will tell you honestly, you spend 40 years building a life that no one in your birth country would permit you to build, and then you sit in a hotel in California and dictate the truth of it to a man who writes it down, and the book comes out, and the first thing the country says is that you made it up, that sits in a man in a place that does not empty, not in a year, not in 10 years. I carried that weight into every room I entered after 1856, and I carried it all the way to Fort C.F. Smith in 1866, and I was still carrying it when I rode toward Iron Bull's village for the last time. By 1859, I was in Denver, 60 years old, or close to it, partnered in a trading operation with Louis Vasquez. I tried farming, took a Mexican wife, and it did not work. The body was keeping its own accounting by then, whether I was paying attention or not. Left knee unreliable in cold weather, and there is a lot of cold weather in Colorado. Right hand, 2 fingers broken badly years earlier and reset without a doctor, stiff and slow now in the mornings. Hearing on one side largely gone from years of standing next to rifle fire at close range. The cold that I had once moved through like it was simply a condition of the work was something my hands argued with before I could get them moving every morning. I went back to trapping and scouting because that was the life my body actually understood, even as it slowed. The life everything else in me had been built around. A man does not easily find a replacement for the thing that made him. And then came November 1864, and Colonel Chivington, and the morning that broke the only thing I had ever built that could not be rebuilt. I want to be straight with you about Sand Creek, not the version that excuses it and not the version that turns me into something simple. The plain version, which is harder than either of those. Chivington came to me at Fort Lyon in the fall of 1864. He needed a guide. He said it was a military operation against hostile Cheyenne. I knew that country better than any white man alive. I knew the streams, the draws, the distances, the camps. There was no one better suited to take him where he wanted to go. What I told myself on the ride out, I have turned that over many times. I told myself that I had no choice. I told myself that refusing a military order at my age and my position had consequences I could not afford. I told myself that maybe it was what he said it was. A legitimate military action, hostile combatants, not what it turned out to be. I have thought about whether I believed any of those things, or whether I was just saying them to myself the way a man says things to himself when he already knows what is true and cannot stand to look at it directly. The Cheyenne camped at Sand Creek had been told by the previous commander of Fort Lyon that they were in a safe location. They were flying an American flag above the camp to signal peaceful intent. They were not armed for war. They were camped exactly where the United States Army had told them to camp. Chivington's men hit them at dawn with artillery and rifles and did not stop until at least 163 people were dead. Men, women, children. I was there. I guided them there. I saw a woman trying to run with a child on each arm. I saw what happened to her. I am not going to describe it further than that. Some things a man carries and does not put into words because the words would not be adequate, and putting them into words would make them into something that could be handled and filed away, and they cannot be handled and they should not be filed away. I stood on that ground in the cold November morning and I watched what Chivington's men did, and there was nothing in my experience, not the Crow raids, not the Blackfoot engagements, not anything I had done in the years of frontier fighting, that looked like what I was watching. This was not war. War has a shape and a code and a specific kind of violence that men who have been in it recognize. This had none of that shape. This was something else. When it was over, I rode away from Sand Creek with something on me that water could not touch. The Cheyenne banned me from trading with them after that. I understood. I would have done exactly the same. What I did not fully reckon with was the Crow. The Crow heard what had happened at Sand Creek. They heard my name connected to it. And the Crow did not forget things. That was something I had always respected about them. Their memory was long and exact, and they did not confuse the record. I had spent 12 years among people with a long, exact memory, and now that memory had my name in it attached to something I could not explain away. I had 5 more years of drifting after that before the Army came to me again. 5 years of a man living in the smoke of what he had done, working the only work available, carrying what he was carrying. By 1866, I was 68 years old and working as a scout and interpreter at Fort C.F. Smith in Montana. Red Cloud's War had the Army needing every man who could speak to the Plains tribes and be heard. There were not many such men left by then. Most of the mountain man generation was dead or broken or gone somewhere no one could find them. Of the men who could speak to the Crow and be trusted by them, there was really only one still working. The Crow agreed to open communications. One condition. Beckwourth would be the intermediary. Bring him to the village, and we will talk. Without him, nothing. I want you to think about what that condition meant. The people I had guided an army column toward the allies of, those same people were asking for me by name, specifically, as the only man they would deal with. I turned that over on the long ride to the village, what it might mean, whether it was the kind of trust that had survived what I had done, or whether it was a different kind of thing entirely. The specific trust of men who have decided what they are going to do and need you inside the lodge to do it. I told myself it was the first kind. I rode toward that village telling myself that for 3 days. I rode toward Iron Bull's village in the fall of 1866, and the ride took 3 days. I had time to think on that ride. Too much time. The country I was moving through was country I had ridden 100 times. The grass flats of eastern Montana, the cottonwoods along the creek bottoms, the specific pale blue of the sky out there in October when the cold is coming but has not fully arrived yet. I knew every feature of that landscape. I had hunted it and fought across it, and in some places buried people in it. It was my country as much as it was anyone's. I thought about the condition I was riding in on that first day versus the condition I had been in the first time I rode through Crow territory 40 years before. Young then, strong, capable of being damaged and recovering quickly the way young men are capable of without fully appreciating it. Now the horse moved under me and my knee complained on the right side, and I shifted my weight to account for it the way a man shifts weight around old damage without thinking about it anymore. The hands on the reins were not the hands of a young man, thick at the knuckles, the 2 stiff fingers on the right that had never come back fully. Capable hands still. Just honest about their history in a way young hands are not. I thought about what I was riding toward, the condition I had placed myself in, the trust that had been extended, and whether it was genuine or whether it was the specific kind of trust that has a particular purpose behind it. I went back and forth on that for 3 days and did not arrive at a conclusion. I rode into the village without one. Iron Bull's band. I had known Iron Bull for years. He was a serious man, not given to ceremony for its own sake, the kind of leader who carried authority so naturally you stopped noticing it. He opened his lodge to me and Thompson, the officer with me, and we were guests. He fed us. He sat with me that first evening and talked the way two men talk who have known each other a long time, carefully with the weight of shared history between every sentence, the way men talk when there is more underneath the words than in them. Thompson noted it all down in his diary. He wrote that the situation appeared normal, that Beckwourth appeared comfortable, that the crow appeared welcoming. The second day the headaches started. Pressure behind my eyes, building slowly. I had known men with severe blood pressure problems on the frontier, the diet, the exertion, the years of it, and I knew what that kind of headache felt like. I told myself that was what this was, the body presenting its final accounting after 68 years of hard use, then the bleeding, my nose. It started on the morning of the third day and it did not stop, not a brief bleed that clears itself, a flow that Thompson described in his diary with the word unstoppable. I lay in the lodge and the bleeding continued and Iron Bull sat nearby and watched. Jim Bridger heard what happened and said plainly, the way Bridger said most things, that the crow had poisoned me. William Byers, who had been my personal friend and ran the Rocky Mountain News, wrote that the tribe had decided they could not trust me after Sand Creek, that I was a man whose loyalties they could no longer read, and that they had acted accordingly. Some accounts say it was a personal matter, a warrior, a wife, a score settled privately with something slipped into food or drink. Some accounts say the tribal council had offered me the war chief's position one final time, and when I declined, they decided that if they could not keep me, they would bury me themselves, and they would bury me with full honor because I had earned that much. I do not know which account is true. I have thought about all of them. I have thought about whether a man who was my host for 3 days, who fed me and sat with me and talked to me like a brother, whether that man could also have ordered what happened to me in his lodge, whether both of those things can be true at the same time. I think they can. I think I know something about how both of those things can be true at the same time because I did something similar at Sand Creek. I was the man who guided the column there. I was also a man who could not watch what happened without being changed permanently by the watching. Both of those things were true at the same time. Honor and the cup, the love and the wound coming from the same hands. Some of you know what that is, to belong somewhere that also cost you something you did not see coming, to be loved by people who also, in the end, decided you had to go. I'm not going to explain that feeling. You know it without explanation. I just want you to know I had it too. Lying in Iron Bull's lodge in the fall of 1866, the blood coming and not stopping, thinking about everything it had taken to get to that room and everything I had done to deserve to end there. Lieutenant Templeton wrote it in his diary. One sentence. No drama, no verdict, just the plain fact of it. There Beckwourth died and was buried by his host. They buried me on a platform in a tree, the Crow way, elevated above the ground, the way the Crow honor their warriors. Iron Bull did that himself, according to Templeton. The man who may have ordered what happened to me buried me with full Crow honor, because I had earned it, because 12 years of fighting and bleeding and learning their language and protecting their trade and leading their warriors counted for something that one morning in 1864 could damage but could not entirely erase. A man born legally owned as property died on a tree platform above Crow ground. The country that called him a liar put his face on a postage stamp in 1994. 128 years after he died. That is what recognition looks like when it arrives too late to matter to the man who spent his life earning it. There is one question about James Beckwourth that historians have argued about for 160 years without a clean answer. You have heard everything that is known. The Bridger account, the Byers account, what Templeton wrote, what happened in Iron Bull's lodge, right below what you believe. One sentence is enough. I want to know what you think. The next story I'm going to tell you is about another man this country forgot on purpose, a man who disappeared into country even harder than the Rockies and left nothing behind him but a name on a map and a question that no one has been able to answer. You are going to want to hear it. James Beckwourth, born owned, died free, above the ground of the only people who ever called him theirs. Let it sit.